attack. The enemy, already shaken by the smartness and discipline of these maneuvers, abandoned their position on the lower slopes of the hills without waiting for the Macedonians to come to grips with them. Thereupon Alexander called on his men to raise the war cry and clash their spears upon their shields, with the result that the din was altogether too much for the Taulantians, who hastily withdrew to the town. A small party of enemy troops was still in possession of a hill by which Alexander would have to pass. He gave orders, accordingly, to the companions and the men of his personal guard to prepare for action and ride to the attack. Their instructions were that if the enemy, who had occupied the hill, should hold their ground, half their number should dismount and fight on foot in close support of their mounted comrades. The hill, however, was not held. The enemy, as a result of this movement of Alexander's, abandoned it, and went off at a tangent towards the mountains. Alexander, with the companions, then occupied the hill, sent for the Agrianes and archers, a force of some 2,000 men, and ordered the guards to cross the river, followed by the other Macedonian units, and on reaching the further side, to form up towards the left in order to present a solid front to the enemy immediately they were across the river. Meanwhile, he kept a careful watch from the hill upon any movement the enemy might make. Seeing the Macedonian troops crossing the river, the natives moved down from the high ground with the intention of falling upon Alexander's party, which would form the rear of the army as it withdrew. And Alexander countered by a rapid sally of his own, while the main body of his infantry, coming to the attack through the river, raised the war cry. The enemy, under the combined onslaught, broke and fled, and Alexander ordered the Agrianes and archers to advance at the double to the river. He himself was the first across, and, setting up his artillery on the river bank, he gave orders for every sort of missile it would take to be discharged at long range against the enemy, whom he could see pressing hard upon those of his own troops who were bringing up the rear. The archers, too, who were already part way over, were ordered to shoot from midstream. Glaucius's men refused to venture within range, and the Macedonians got across safely, without a single casualty during the process of withdrawal. 3 days later, information came in that the troops under Clitus and Glaucius were encamped without adequate precautions. No regular sentries had been posted, and no palisade or trench constructed for their protection. Their line, moreover, was perilously extended. Alexander at once took advantage of this carelessness, which was due, presumably, to the assumption that he had retreated in panic. Under cover of darkness he took the guards, the Agrianes, the archers, and the troops of Perdiccas and Chinos back across the river, with orders to the rest of the army to follow. The moment was ripe for attack, so without waiting for the entire force to concentrate, he sent into action the Agrianes and the archers, who made a surprise assault on a narrow front, a formation likely to fall with greatest effect upon the enemy at his weakest point. Some they killed in their beds, others they took without difficulty as they tried to escape. Many were caught and killed on the spot, many more as they fled in panic and disorder. Not a few were captured alive. The pursuit was pressed as far as the mountains in Taulantian territory. None escaped, except at the cost of throwing away their weapons. Clitus's first move was to the town. Later he set fire to it, and made his way to the Taulantians, where he sought refuge with Glaucius. Meanwhile, events were taking place in Thebes. Certain persons, with a view to overthrowing the government, had invited a number of political exiles to return. These men, having slipped into the city during the night, had seized and murdered Amyntas and Timaulus, 2 of the men who were holding the Cadmea, and had no suspicion of any danger outside. They then presented themselves in the assembly, and incited the Thebans to rebel against Alexander, making great play with the grand old words liberty and autonomy, and urging them at long last to throw off the burden of the Macedonian yoke. They made their appeal more attractive to the Thebans in general by insisting that Alexander had died in Illyria, which was, as it happened, a common rumor at the time, and fairly widely disseminated, because he had been long absent without communicating with them. In these circumstances they did what most of us do, and, being ignorant of the truth, persuaded themselves into believing what they wished to believe. The news of these events caused Alexander considerable concern. For a long time past he had had doubts about Athens, and now had come this attempt from Thebes. He could not but take it seriously, for the danger clearly was that the spirit of disaffection might spread to the Spartans, who already, in any case, silently resented Macedonian control, and to other states in the Peloponnese, and even to the Aetolians, who were by no means to be trusted. He therefore decided to act, and, proceeding by way of Iordaia and Eleniotis and the mountain ranges of Stympia and Paravaia, arrived within 7 days at Pellina in Thessaly. 6 days later he entered Boeotia, and the news that he had passed the gates did not reach the Thebans until his whole force was at Onchystus. Even then the organizers of the revolt continued to maintain that Alexander was dead. An army under Antipater, they declared, had arrived from Macedonia, and anyone who reported that Alexander himself was in command, they met with an angry denial. If it was Alexander at all, they insisted, it was another Alexander, Eropus' son.